Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Mem Chet. Itmar, Haoreg Beged Lemet Abaye Amar Asur, Verava Amar Mutar. If someone weaves a garment and he intends that he's going to use this garment as a burial shroud for the dead, and then in the end he doesn't use it for that and he wants to use it for something else, he wants to wear it. So Abaye says it's not permitted because once it was designated as a burial shroud, you're not allowed to get any benefit from it. If it was actually used as a burial shroud, let's say, then nobody is allowed to get any benefit from it. That's the halacha we saw yesterday. So here, even though he only intended for it and designated it as such, it already becomes prohibited. Rava, however, says, Rava var mutad, it's permitted to use it because you didn't use it yet. So here's the reasoning of their argument. Abaye amar asur hazmana miletahi. Rava amar mutad hazmana lab miletahi. Abaye says that designation is a legally significant category. And so just designating it means that's it. It's already to be used for the dead and is prohibited. Rava says that designation is not a legally significant category. You just designated it. That's not it's just a soft reservation. It's not actually changing it into an actual item for the dead. And therefore, if you change your mind, that's okay, as long as it wasn't actually used for the dead. My ta'ama de Abaye. What is the Abaye's source that hazmana designation is significant? Gamar sham ma'igla arufa. Ma'igla arufa behazmana mitasra. Hainame behazmana mitasera. He uses a gezerah shava of the word sham. Well, the word sham unfortunately appears a lot of times, so we're going to see there are in fact multiple ways to take this. But in any case, it says Miriam died there. It says sham, and she was buried there, sham. Okay, so since it says the word sham regarding burial, and it also says the word sham regarding igla arufa, a murder mystery, the elders of that city shall bring down the heifer to a hard valley, which is neither plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there, sham, in the valley. So just like igla arufa, once an animal is designated, we had this murder mystery, we measured, okay, we got an animal, a heifer, and we designate it. This is going to be for igla arufa. From that point, from the point of designation, even before it's actually used in the ceremony, it's already prohibited from use. For sure, afterwards, the body, after it's killed, is prohibited to get any benefit from it. And so we see regarding Eglat, we know already from Eglat Ufa that hazmana designation is significant, it's already prohibited. And so too, we learn from Sham that from Miriam, that burial is also, designation for burial is also going to make something prohibited, even though you didn't use it yet. ורבה גמר שם מעבודה זרה, מעבודה זרה בהזמנה למיתסרה, אף החנמה בהזמנה למיתסרה. Rava says, no, I'm going to compare the same pasuk from Miriam, which is about burial. I'm going to compare it to a pasuk in Devarim regarding idolatry, the place in which the nations serve their gods there, says Sham. And regarding Avodah Zarah, just because you designate some item for idolatry, it does not become prohibited until you actually use it for idolatry. Like if someone designates an animal, says, this animal I'm going to use to worship idolatry, but he didn't actually do it. Then he changes his mind. That's okay, you're allowed to use it. So just like regarding Avodah Zarah, designation is not significant, so too, if you designate something as a burial shroud, it's not considered significant, you can change your mind and you can use it. Now Rava, how come you didn't use the comparison? Says the word Sham also regarding Igla Rufa and the burial of Miriam. Why don't you agree with that comparison? Amar lach mishameshin mim mishameshin gamrinan lapoke Igla Rufa tihi gufa kedosha. Because he wants to compare accessories to accessories and not the main thing. Regarding Avodah Zarah, we're talking about an animal that you're going to sacrifice to some idol. So it's not the idol itself, it's just an accessory. And so too, we're not talking about a dead body itself, but rather an accessory to the deceased, like a burial shroud. So both of these are accessory items that you're going to use for a main item, so they have something in common. Whereas Eglat Ufa, the heifer, is the main event. That's the main thing that we are going to use to make the ceremony. So that's different from the other two. ואביי, מה טעמה לא גמר מעבודה זרה? אמר לך, מידי דאורחה ממידי דאורחה גמרינן. לפוקי עבודה זרה, דלאו אורחה. How come Abaye doesn't learn from avodah zarah to burial, and therefore it will be allowed? Because he says we should learn from two things that is the proper conduct that you're allowed to do, and not from something that is a prohibition. So burial, you're supposed to do burial. Egla rufa, also, you're supposed, if you're in a situation where there's a murder mystery, you're supposed to do egla rufa. Both of these are mitzvot that you should do. And we're not going to learn that from avodah zarah, which is an improper form of conduct. And so those two are more similar. That explains the derivation of each of their opinions. The Gemara now is going to bring a series of proofs for and against Rava and Abaye. A mnemonic to remember, the order of them is Siman Kipan Nafshe Dachasiba Nechisa Deumana. The first one is a challenge against Rava from a Baraita, and this is the kippah, which means a scarf. And the Baraita teaches Kippashu Tameh Midras un Tanato Lesefer Tahor Min HaMidras Aval Tameh Maga Midras. If you have a scarf that became Tameh from treading, and that means, for example, a zav. A zav makes things tameh by touching them, but that thing that he touches will have only a light level of tum'ah. A zav also makes things tameh that he sits on, if it's something that's designated for sitting on, like a chair or a bench, or a cushion, or a scarf. If the scarf is on the chair and is meant for sitting on, and then the zav comes and he sits on it, so that scarf will become tameh, the high level of tumat midras. Now here's the case. You have a scarf that the zav sit on, and it became tameh tumat midras. And then the owner of the scarf says, you know what? I decide I'm going to use the scarf to tie onto a Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah has a scarf on it to use to cover it. And so now he's going to use it as a Sefer Torah covering, which means it's not made for sitting on anymore. So immediately upon designation, even before, it seems, even before he ties it onto wraps it around a Sefer Torah, it already leaves, the Tumah Midras leaves. So Tomina Midrash, just by the designation, doesn't have to do anything, just say, this is going to be used for the wrapping of a Sefer Torah, and now it's no longer, since it's no longer used for sitting on, so that the Tumat Midras goes away. However, it is still Tameh, the lower level, because Zav also touched it, so that if a Zav touches anything, it's going to get the lower level. So what do we see from here? That designation by itself is significant. Challenge to Rava, who says designation is not significant. Rava can answer, Ema netanatu uchrachatu. When it says that he designated it for a Sefer Torah, it's not only designated, put in an extra word, he designated and he wrapped it around a Torah scroll. So he did the action as well. If he had only designated it, then it still would be tameh. Now we ask, Lama li netanatu uchrachatu. Why would you, once you're adding a word, so why do you need both of these words? Why would you say you have to designate it and wrap it? Wouldn't it be enough to just say, and he wrapped it? I mean, according to you, Rava, that you say it's only becomes tahor if you actually wrap a Sefer Torah with it. So then just say, if he wraps a Sefer Torah with it. It doesn't really matter if he designated it or not, because the designation by itself doesn't do anything. So why is he saying both verbs? And the answer is, Keder Rav Chisda, Damar Rav Chisda, Hai sudara de azmeneh lemesar be tefilin, vesar be tefilin, asur lemesar be peshiteh, azmeneh velo sarbe velo azmeneh, share lemesar be peshiteh. Rav Chisda taught that if you have a piece of cloth and you designated it for bundling your tefillin in it. So anything that, the tefillin itself, of course, you can't use for other purposes, but even that things that serve the tefillin, the bag that the tefillin is immediately in, that also cannot be used for other things. You can't take your tefillin bag and then go use it as a wallet. If someone took a cloth and he designated it, he says, I'm going to use this cloth to wrap my tefillin in it. And he also wrapped his tefillin in it. He did both, designated it and wrapped it in. Then from that point onwards, he's not allowed to use that cloth for anything else. You can't put coins in it or use it for non-sacred purposes. Okay, what do we see from this? As meneh, only if he first designated it and also used it. But let's say he designated it, but he didn't use it yet. Or he used it once, but didn't designate it. In that case, it does not become exclusively used for the tefillin, and you can use it to bundle coins. It was just like a one-time only thing. He needed to bundle his tefillin somewhere. He took a cloth. He says, okay, I'm just going to use it for now to bundle my tefillin. But he didn't designate it as such. And therefore, if you only bundle the tefillin in it, so then that's just a temporary usage of this cloth. I didn't mean to designate it, so it doesn't become holy. And if you just designated it but didn't actually use it, also, it doesn't become holy. And so that's why Rava had to say, in this case also, this cloth, you have to designate it and also wrap it around the scarf, because otherwise, if you just wrap it around the Torah, if you just wrap it around, so that means it doesn't designate it, just a one-time use. And if you only designated it, according to Rava, that doesn't do anything. And so that's why it has to be both, just like for tefillin, so too for a Sefer Torah. Now, how will Abaye explain the Rav Chista's law? Because he says that a designation by itself is significant. So he'll say as follows: Azmene afagav de la sarbe, sarbe I azmene in, ila azmene la. If he designated it, even if he didn't use it, that then it's already designated. He cannot do anything else with it. If he used it once, then it depends. If he had already designated it, then it becomes designated, and you can't use for anything else. But if he did not designate it, then one-time usage, according to Abaye also, will not make it holy. And so we see that Abaye also can be reconciled, because although, according to Abaye, Hazmanah by itself will make it prohibited, but he would agree that wrapping one time by itself will not make it designated, unless it was designated verbally before or in thought. Ta'ashema, a second proof against Rava. Nefesh shebena'ol Hashem chai mutar b'hana'ah. Hosif bo dimos echad Hashem met asur b'hana'ah. If someone made a monument could be a big mausoleum like this, or just a small tombstone. But in this case, it's a monument for someone living. Even while someone's alive, important person, they might have a monument that's built in their honor. So although that is eventually will be the place where the person is buried, right? Maybe it's nice. You want to see your tombstone while you're alive already. Anyway, the tombstone is there. The person is still alive. So that stone, we're calling a monument, not a tombstone. There's no tomb yet. So you're permitted to use it for something else, because it's not yet used for the dead. Once if there's a dead person buried there and a tombstone on top, for sure you can't use that for anything else. You can't go make a coffee table out of it, right? That's something that's designated. Okay, so while the person is still alive, you can use it. However, if he added one row of stones on it for the sake of the dead, and he said specifically, right, we're going to bury this person here, even though he wasn't buried yet there, but now he's saying, I'm going to put this here now, and then I'm going to use it for a tombstone. So then you cannot use the whole thing for get benefit from the entire thing. It seems from here that just designation, because he did something to it and is now designating it as a tombstone by adding a row, now it's already prohibited. So this would be a proof for Abaye that designation by itself, even before the person is buried there, is already makes it prohibited. Challenge against Rava. Rava answers, no, we're talking about a case where the corpse was buried there. So that's why it's not just designation, it's actually usage of it. Wait a second, if that's true, then why do you have to say if he added a row of stones? Even if he didn't add a row of stones? If you have a monument to someone alive, okay, while they're alive, certainly everybody would agree that's okay. But now if you actually buried someone there, then even without adding a row of stones, there's someone buried here. It is actually a tombstone. So nobody would think that you can get hana'ah from that. La sericha afagav defanye. Oh, we're talking about a case where they did put the body there, but then they removed the body. They sent it to Israel or something. And so now, if there is no extra row of stones, so this monument was made for someone who's alive. Okay, good. Now you can use it. They buried the person there. Now you can't use it because now it's a tombstone. Then they removed the body, and now you have the original stone there. It goes back to being permitted because it was never made as a tombstone. It was made for someone alive. That's case one. If, however, they added a row of stones, having in mind, oh, this will be used for a tombstone, and that by itself would not make it prohibited because that's only a designation. If they then buried the corpse there, that's certainly prohibited. And even if they remove the corpse, then the whole thing remains prohibited because it had been designated with the extra row of stones and used. But when he was buried, even if the body is not there anymore, it's not allowed. That's how Rava will explain it. Amar Afram bar Papa Amar Rav Chisda Imaya Makiro Choso Umutad. An addendum to this law: if you recognized which row of stones was added, you can see here it's the one on top over here. Then you can remove those stones, and the rest of it will be permitted. Since the rest of it was made while the person was alive for the sake of the living, it was a monument for the living, so it was never built as a tombstone, so that part of it is fine. It's just the added part that makes it prohibited. So if you can remove those stones because you know which ones they are, then the rest of it will be permitted. Okay, now another proof against Rava, Tashema. HaChoseb kever la'aviv halach ukbaro bekever acher hareze lo yikaber bo olamit. We already saw this braita. If someone dug a grave to bury his father in one place, and then in the end he changed his mind and he buried his father in a different place, he cannot use that grave forever because he designated it for his father. So it seems from here that designation, this grave was never used, but just designating it, that already makes it into a grave and you cannot use it for anything else. So that's a challenge against Rava. Designation is significant. And we say, no, you misunderstood. Hatam mishum kibod aviv. This is a special case because he made it in honor of his father. That's why, in particular, it would be disrespectful then to use it for something else. However, if he dug a grave for his friend, and then he decided not to use it for his friend, well, in that case, that's not significant. It was not used. Designation is not significant. Here, it's just the honor of the father. If he made it for his father, he can't use it for anything else. Hachinami mistabera, dekatani sefa, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, af hachoseh babanim la'aviv, v'halachu kbaro b'makom acher, hareze lo yikaber bahen olamit. And this interpretation makes sense because of the continuation where Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, also someone who hewed stones for his father. He didn't build a grave yet, he quarried some stones. And then intending that he's going to use these stones to build a grave for his father, but then he decided to go somewhere else and he didn't use those stones. So the law is that the son cannot use those stones for his own burial or for other things forever. Now, let's analyze this. If you say that the reason why he can't reuse them is because of the honor of his father, he went and quarried these stones for an honor of his father to bury him. He didn't end up using them, but since he originally took them for an honor of his father, so now he can't downgrade them and just use them for himself or for something else. So that makes sense if it's because of kavod aviv. But if you think it's because they were designated for the deceased, well, this is only a raw material. And let's go back to the weaving case. If someone just spins yarn and he has in mind, I'm spinning this yarn and so that I can weave it for burial shrouds that I will put on the dead. Does anybody think that yarn becomes prohibited? Nobody thinks that. The raw materials are not a thing yet. And so the raw materials never become prohibited, even if you're making the raw materials in order to use for something. And therefore, the quarried stones, even if you intend, I'm going to use them for a grave, some friend's grave, they don't become prohibited, even if you had in mind to use them and you don't end up using them. So therefore, nobody would think that. So therefore, when Rabban Shimon Gamliel says, also the stones are prohibited, it's clear that they're only prohibited because of honor of the father. Tashema. Now we're going to try to support Rava from a Baraita. Keber chadash murtar b'hana'ah. Hitil bo nefel asur b'hana'ah. A new grave, somebody dug a grave for no one in particular, and then changed their mind. No, I don't want to use it for a grave. I want to use it to store something underground there. That's permitted because nobody was ever buried there. However, if one buried anyone in there, even if it was a baby, a newborn who was non-viable, then once it's used at all, that's prohibited. So we analyze hitil in, lo hitil la. Only if you use it, if someone's actually buried there, that's when it becomes permitted. But designation by itself does not make it prohibited. A proof for Rava against Abaye. Abaye can answer, Hu hadin da'afal gav de lo hitil. Indeed, this grave would be prohibited even if nobody was put into it, not even a non-viable baby. According to Abaye, you'd have to read this baraita as follows. A new grave, meaning a hole that you didn't designate at all. Someone just dug a hole, not having in mind that it's going to be a grave. So since it's not designated, you can use it for anything. However, once it's designated, then it's prohibited. And now you're going to ask, well, why give an example of when you put a nefel in it if it's prohibited once you designate it, even before you put a nefel in it? Oh, the reason why the Braita added that is because it wanted to reject the opinion of Rabban Shimon Gamliel, who says that nefalim, these unviable babies, do not take possession of the grave. Meaning, for a viable person who dies and is buried, they make prohibited not only the grave but also an area surrounding it. However, Rabban Shimon Gamliel says for a nefel that's not true. So because he wanted to reject that opinion and say no, there's no difference, and a nefel also will have the same law as a regular person who dies and is buried there. That's why it added, a nefel will make it asur b'hana'ah the same way as it will an adult. But in fact, the grave will be prohibited after designation only, even before anyone is buried there. The next source is a proof for Rava from a Mishnah Masechet Shekalim Tashema Motar Metim Lametim Motar Hamet LeYorshav. If the community collects money for the burial fund to collect for whoever dies and cannot afford it, so that money, if there's leftover, they buried a few people and then there's leftover, you can't use it for anything else. It has to be used for the future to help other people who need funds for burial. However, if they collect money for a specific deceased person, and they collect more than they need. They collected $1,000. They only used $800. So the remaining $200 goes to the heirs. What do we see here? From the second case, that even though this money has been raised for burial, that means it was designated for burial of the dead. Nevertheless, even if it wasn't used, then it's not holy, and the heirs can take it and you spend it on whatever they want. So we see that designation is not significant proof for Rava. What will Abaye say? We're talking about a case where they collected the money while the person was still alive. He was very sick, and so the heirs went and they collected money while the person was alive. Now, any money they take in while he's alive, obviously everybody would agree, is permitted because it's not being used for the dead. No one is dead yet. And that's why, if there's extra, they can take it. But this answer doesn't work because there's a Braita that comments on the Mishnah that says they collected for the dead. And here we're going to quote the Mishnah again. What we just said. V'tani ala kesad gavu lemetim setam zehu motar hametim lametim. Gavu lemet zehu motar hametim liyorshav. The Braita explains what is referred to in these two categories. If they collect for deceased peoples in general, for the communal fund for burial, then that's what we're talking about, that the extra that they raise has to go to deceased people in the future. But if they raise money for this specific person, it says lemet zeh, not lechai zeh, not for a sick person or a live person, but that means that they collected the money when the person had already died. And there's extra that goes to the heirs. So this is again a problem against Abaye, because if they collected the money when the person was dead, that means it's designated to be used for burial. And how can you go and benefit from it and use it for other things? Abaye will answer, V'leta'amich ema sefa. Rabbi Meir omer lo yiga behen ad shevo Eliyahu. Rabbi Natan omer ya'asenu dimos al kibro o ziluf lifne mitato. There's actually two more opinions in that same Mishnah. Rabbi Meir says that extra money that you raised for a particular person, that extra $200, you have to leave it alone in a drawer until Eliyahu Nafi comes and says what to do with it. Meaning, maybe it is holy, maybe not. Rabbi Natan said, it's for sure holy, and therefore you have to use it for something. And if there's extra money, so make an extra row of stones. The rows of stones are a decoration. They make the stone more grand. So spend a little more money on it, or you can pour fragrant wine on the casket, and that gives honor to the person. That's something that they also used to do. Probably back then, if they waited some time and it was hot out, the body would be smelling. So they put some good fragrance on it. So use it for something. You could always spend more money. And so Rabbi Natan thinks it definitely is holy. So we see Abaye says, look, I have these two Tanaim who think that the extra money that was designated, even though it wasn't used, has to be used for burial. So I definitely have support. Now we're going to explain all three opinions in the Mishnah, both according to Abaye and also according to Rava. Abaye says all three Tanaim, Tanakama, and these two minority opinions think that designation only is significant, and you can't use it once money is raised. Tana kama sabar dechazile tafis de la chazile la tafis. Tana kama will say whatever you need, that is what becomes holy. Whatever is not needed does not become holy. So the fact that they raised $1,000, that the rate, just collecting the money by itself doesn't make it holy unless it's money that is needed for the burial. And so for the $800 part that's needed for the burial, that will have become holy. But once we see that this $200 was extra, so we say that this is not included in the designation, because only that which will end up being used will have been designated in a way retroactively. And therefore, we don't automatically designate. We know that it might be more than we need. And so having that in mind, so when they raise it, they have in mind, we're only designating that which we will end up spending, but if there's extra, that will go to the heirs. And the people donating it, the people collecting it, have that in mind. Rabbi Meir, he's not sure. This money was collected, so it was designated for burial. Does designation, is it significant? Is it not significant? He's not sure. Therefore, leave the money and don't give it to the heirs. You don't have to use it either. When Eliyahu comes, then he'll tell you what to do with it. Rabbi Natan peshita le devadai tafis hilkach yaseh dimos al kibro. Rabbi Natan says for sure you raised the money for burial. It's designated. That's totally like Abaye, and therefore it's significant, and you have to use it for burial, and just go ahead and spend extra money on it. Rava says, according to everybody, designation without actually using it is not significant. Tanakama sabar ki bazule achule machil zilute gabe yoreshin. Tanakama says, even though the heirs disgraced the deceased, the heirs went and they raised more money than necessary. And the deceased, if he was alive, let's say that's their father, his father would say, what, you went and raised extra money for my burial, and now you're going to benefit from it? You're keeping the proceeds, right? If you raised it, you should use it. And so, according to Tanakama, even though it's a disgrace that the heirs went and collected more money than they needed for their father's burial, now they're going to go out to dinner with it. Nevertheless, he forgoes his disgrace for his heirs. They're his kids after all, so he's like, okay. And that's why Tanakama says, any extra, they can use it. It's not the nicest thing that they did, but it's permitted. Rabbi Meir is not sure. Psychologically, will most people forego on this extra money and say, you raised extra money and you don't want to use it on my burial? That's okay. maybe he is, maybe he would forego, maybe he wouldn't forego. Therefore, we have to leave it on the side till Eliyahu Navi comes. Hilkach lo yiga bahen v'chule. Rabbi Natan peshita le de la machil. Hilkach yaseh dimos al kibro ziluf lifnei mitato. But according to Rabbi Natan, he says for sure that the deceased, the father, would be really upset and would not forego. And says, if you raise that money on behalf of my burial, then you have to use it for my burial. You can't go and buy yourself a gift for it. Rather, do something more honorable. Build another row or pour fragrant wine on the casket. And so, according to Rava, this is not about the law of designation and the prohibition of something that's designated for burial then you can't use. It's actually not about that at all. It's about if one does something disgraceful and raises more money than they need, can we assume that the deceased will forego and say to the heirs, yeah, use it, or he would be particular and say, no, you can't use it for anything else, you have to use it for my burial. So that's the subject matter, and it has nothing to do, according to Rava, about designation. And all these Tanaim, according to Rava, would agree that designation is in fact not significant. And now we have another proof in support of Rava from a Baraita, Tashema. Hayu aviv imo mizarkin bo kelim misfa lacharim lehasilan. If you have a father and mother and their son died, and they're expressing their grief by taking their son's clothing and throwing it onto the coffin. So other people should go and save the clothing and take it. Because although the son died, and that's very sad, and we understand the parents are expressing their extreme grief by saying, here, put the clothing in there too, but it's perfectly good clothing, no reason for it to just be buried, and so people should save it. And so we see here this clothing was not actually used for the body. The body was not dressed with these as shrouds, but they were designated as such by the parents to say, here, this should be for the dead. And yet the people are allowed to save it and use it. So this is a proof that designation is not significant for Rava. What will Abaye say? And the answer is Hatam Mishum Meraraihu. No, in that case, it's clear that the parents are throwing the garments onto the coffin only because of bitterness. They're not intending that this should be a burial shroud. It's just an expression of bitterness, and there's actually no designation here at all. If so, how will you explain the Baraita that says, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, when do we say people should go and save the clothing and use it? Only if the parents threw it towards the coffin, but they didn't touch the coffin. So then nothing happened. But if it touches the coffin, it's prohibited. Well, why would that be? Why should there be a difference? Even if it touches the coffin, if it's just an expression of bitterness, so then there's no designation there either, and it should be permitted no matter what. So how will Abaye explain that? And the answer is we're talking about a coffin or a bier that is buried with him. In other words, sometimes, like normally today, we have a coffin and the body is buried with the coffin. But like in Israel, they use a stretcher just to carry the body, and then they don't bury the stretcher, then they use it again. So La explains that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is in fact talking about this type of coffin that's buried with the body. And so if they throw it and it touches the coffin and then that's going to be buried, that is a problem because people will mistake it for shrouds because it's touching the coffin, it's on top of it, it's on top of the body, so they will say, well, this is has the same law as shrouds, and if you allow people to take these clothing, they'll think that you can then also use the shrouds. That's why it's not allowed if it touches the coffin. If it's a type of just a stretcher that's reused and it touches it, then that's no problem because it's clear that this is not going into the ground. This is going to be taken away, and then surely one can use it. And so therefore, that's the reason. And no one ever designated or intended to designate this clothing as being for the dead. In fact, it's only expression of bitterness. And since it's only expression of bitterness, technically, even if it touches the coffin, it would be permitted. But if it's a coffin that goes in the ground, then people will mistake it for shrouds, and that's why it's not allowed. Tashema kis she'asa'o lehaniach bo tefillin asul lehaniach bo ma'ot. Haniach bo tefillin yaniach bo ma'ot. And now a proof for Abaye. that says if one made a pouch to put tefillin in, he didn't put tefillin in it yet, he just made it for that purpose. You're not already at that point, you're not allowed to put money in it. Well, since you made it, designated it as a tefillin case, therefore you cannot use it for anything else, even though you didn't use it yet. Also, if you took a regular pouch that hadn't been designated and he used it one time for tefillin, so then he is allowed to then put money in it because he didn't designate it. So we see that the main thing actually is designation. Even without using it, does make it significant, whereas usage without designation doesn't. So this is a proof for Abaye that designation is significant. The answer that Rava could give is Ema, asa'o v'hiniach bo tefillin, asul laniach bo ma'ot, ked Rav Chisda. We could explain this as meaning that if he made it with intent to use for tefillin, meaning he designated, and he also used it for tefillin, then it's not permitted. Like Rav Chisda said before, that actually has to be both, because if you only designate it, then, right, this according to Rava would say that's not significant. If you only use it without designation, that's also not significant, but actually you need both, and that's what the Mishnah means when it says that if he made it with then designated it for tefillin and he also used it, that's when it's prohibited. But if he didn't designate it, then even if he used it, then he can use it for money afterwards. So we resolve that one. Okay, another baraita supporting Rava Tashema. Amar la'uman aseli tik shel sefer or nartik shel tefillin ad shelo nishtamesh bahen kodesh. Mutar nishtamesh bahen chol, nishtamesh bahen kodesh, asur lishtamesh bahen chol. If someone tells the craftsman, can you please make me a case for a Sefer Torah or a bag for tefillin? If he did not yet use it for a holy purpose, right? He received this bag or this case, and he didn't put a tefillin or a Torah in it yet, then he can change his mind and he can use it for something else. He can use it for a wallet, he can use the case to store something else. But once he uses it and actually puts the Torah in it or tefillin in it, then he's not allowed to use it for secular purposes. So we see that designation is not significant, and this is a good proof. We have no answer to this. So it's clear that this baraita, it was only he did designate it because he told the artisan make it for that purpose, and yet it's not significant. You could use it forever. You could use it for whatever you want, as long as you didn't yet put the Sefer Torah or Tefillin in it. So the only way we can answer this is to say Tana'ehi. In fact, there are Tana'im this way and that way. Once you have this answer, you can go back and all the other baraitot that we saw. Some of the answers were really pushing it into the words, and the words didn't fit so well. So we were trying our best to explain all the baraitot according to Rava and all the baraitot according to Abaye. However, now we gave up on that, and we conclude, in fact, Abaye and Rava are arguing about the same subject that Tanaim were arguing about, and therefore this baraita over here is clearly like Rava, and the other baraitot that were difficult to fit in both ways, so they could be like either Rava or Abaye. So where do we see a machloket about this? Here, the Tanya. Sipan zahav o shetala alhen or shel behemat timea pesulot. Tefillin are not, you have to be black. You can't coat them with gold. People might say, oh, I want to make them more beautiful. Yeah, but it's not allowed. That's the halacha Mishim Sinai, has to be only black. So if someone puts a gold on it, or if they needed a patch, there was a hole in it, and you made a patch with hide from a non-kosher animal. Tefillin have to be made from a kosher. All the parts of it have to be made from parts of a kosher animal, the hide of a kosher animal. So even one patch from a non-kosher animal, it's no good. However, or behemat tehora kesherot afal pi shelo ibedan lishman. If you make a patch out of hide from a kosher animal, then the tefillin are kosher. Even though you did not prepare the hides, you didn't tan the hides for the sake of a mitzvah. Ideally, you should prepare it for the sake of a mitzvah. If you didn't, that's okay. It's only a patch, and you just, you need to patch it up so you can get any regular that leather. So we see, according to Tanakama, the designation is not so important. This wasn't designated for a mitzvah, okay, but now you're using it for a mitzvah, that's okay. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, af or behemat tehora pesulot ad sheye abedo lishman. Rashba Rashbag, however, says even a patch made from a kosher animal is not allowed unless you prepared it, you tanned it for the sake of using it for a mitzvah for tefillin. So we see that according to Rashbag, designation is significant. You have to designate it from before for this purpose. So now that we see that it's a machloket Tanaim, so now we can ascribe all the baraitot before to one school or the other. The Gemara next returns to the original subject matter that got us into this whole discussion in the first place, which is shrouds that are designated for a deceased but not used yet. So here's the question: Amar le Ravina le Rava, mi'ika duchta deramu be'met varge beged lamet. Ravina asks Rava, is there any place where someone dies first and only then they weave a garment on their behalf? Right? Isn't it more normal to have some garments ready just in case someone dies? You don't wait till someone dies and then say, oh, someone go weave a garment. So is there any place where they do that? He says there is a place, those who die in this place harpanya, where they're very poor and they can't afford to go and make shrouds while they're alive and just leave them on the side. So it's only when someone dies then they weave it on, for that particular person. Darash more hilcheta kevated abayev Rabbanan amre hilcheta kevated Ravav hilcheta kevated Rava. More gave a public lecture and he says halacha is like Abaye, that designation is significant, but the other rabbis disagreed and said halacha is like Rava, and the final ruling follows the majority. Halacha is like Rava, that mere designation is not significant. Next, we go back to the subject of death penalty with a braita tenor banan. Haruge malchut nichsehen lamelech, haruge betin nichsehen la yorshin. Rabbi Yehuda omer af haruge malchut nichsehen la yorshin. If someone gets killed by the king rather than the Sanhedrin, so the Sanhedrin, that's the regular, or a court of 23, that's the regular judicial way that someone would get capital punishment. But there's an alternate path, which is the king. The king can adjudicate anything that he wants. It's the law of the king. That is a parallel court separate from the judicial system. And so if the king says this guy must die, then the king gets all of the money of the convict. Whereas if a bet din has someone killed by capital punishment, then the heirs get the property. It doesn't go to the judges or to the state or anybody else. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, in all cases, even if a king executes someone, the money goes to the heirs. A king cannot take it. Amru le Rabbi Yehuda, v'halo kevar ne'emar, v'hineh becherem navot asher yarad sham le'rishto. So the Tanakama tells Rabbi Yehuda, we have a proof from the story of Achav and Izevel. Achav wants the vineyard of his next door neighbor Navot. He's like, how am I going to get it? And Izevel says, I'll take care of it. And she gets two people to be false witnesses and to say that Navot is a blasphemer against Hashem and the king, and therefore he must be executed, and he's executed by the king. And then she tells her husband, you can go now and take the property because Navot is dead, right? So evidently, when someone is killed by the king can get it. And the proof here is from the pasuk that Hashem tells Eliyahu Hanavi, go meet Achav, because he is in the vineyard of Navot, Navot, where he went down to inherit it. So if this is being told in prophecy to Eliyahu, evidently he's going there legally. Okay, the killing of Navot was certainly illegal because it was based on false witnesses. But now that he was killed by a king, now he has a legal right to inherit it. So it seems from this pasuk, it's a proof for Tanakama that when someone is killed by the king, then the king inherits the property. Amar lehen ben achi aviv hayav ra'oi lo yerosho hayad. Rabbi Yehuda says no. The reason, in fact, even someone killed by the king, all the property goes to the heirs. And it happened to be that Achav was a relative of Nadav. He was his cousin, and therefore the closest relative. He didn't have any closer relatives. So that's why he got to inherit it. We ask, wait a second, Navot actually had many kids. We're about to quote the pasuk that proves that. So his kids should have inherited it. Rabbi Yehuda answers, Amar lehen, Oto ve'et banav harag, shenemar, im lo et deme Navot ve'et deme banav ra'iti. Rabbi Yehuda says, in fact, Achav and Izebel had not only Navot killed, but all his sons also. How convenient. Now there's nobody to inherit, and he is the closest relative, and so he inherits. As the pasuk says, and this is from a prophecy that Hashem tells to Eliyahu. Hashem says, did I not see the blood of Navot and the blood of his children? And therefore, Achav needs to be punished. So see, says here, the blood not only of Navot, but of his children. Blood of his children. That means they were murdered as well. And that's why Achav is inheriting as the closest relative. V'Rabbanan, and how will Rabbanan interpret this pasuk? Hahu banim ha're'uyin laset mimenu. No, he did not have actual children, but when it says that Hashem is lamenting, it says, look at the blood of his children, of Navot and his sons. It means his potential sons. Like we learned in the Mishnah, that if someone is killed wrongly by witnesses, then you're killing not only that person, but all the children that he would have had for all future generations. So that's what it means. Him and his potential sons, but Rabbanan don't think that he actually had sons. We can understand the following pasuk better according to the opinion Tanakama that says when the king executes someone, then the king gets all the property of that person who he killed. That's why when Izebel tells the witnesses what to say, she tells them, you should testify that Navot berach, that means cursed, Navot cursed God and the king, is because she had to make sure to include the king there so that it would go to the king's court, and then the king would execute him, and the king would take the property. But according to the Yehuda, who says that no matter what, whether it's a king or the Bet Din that does the execution, it goes to the heirs, and in any case, Navot was the closest heir, so then why did she have to tell the witnesses to add in a charge against cursing the king? She could have picked any charge, any capital punishment, and cursing Hashem is one of them. So she just said, testify that Navot cursed Hashem, and then would go to a Bet Din. The Bet Din would kill him. He's the closest relative. He would get it anyway. So why was it important, according to the Yehuda, that she told him that she had them accuse Navot of cursing the king? And in answer, we answer with another question. Elohim lamali. So if you say that it was important to say to curse the king, so it would go to the king, well then why do you need that he cursed Hashem also? So their witnesses could have said simply, oh, he cursed the king, so it would go to the king. And that by itself is treason, is worthy of capital punishment. So why would they have to add Elohim? So either way, someone's going to have to explain why there's two charges. Rather, is to increase the anger of the judges, is also to increase the anger of the judges, of the king, of everybody who listened. What's this guy? He cursed Hashem and also the king, and everybody's going to be in outrage. Yeah, kill him. And they certainly won't blame then the king and Izebel and the witnesses. They'll be like, oh yeah, he really deserves to die. So that's why, in any case, they brought both charges. We could understand these pasukim better according to the one who says that all the property goes to the king. That's why Yoav was being killed by the king, by King Shlomo, because Yoav was rebellious. So that's why Yoav went and he ran to the Mishkan and he grabbed on to the corners of the altar where he thought he'd be safe and wouldn't be able to be taken and killed by the king. And when the king sends his messenger to say, get out of here because you have to be killed, he says, no, I will not leave, I will die here. So, if if someone killed by the king, and he goes to the king and he dies there, and all his property goes to the king, then we can understand why he ran away to the Mizbeach, and he says, I'll die here. He might die there of hunger because no one's going to feed him, but he'll stay there and die, because that way, if he's not executed by the king, his property won't go to the king. So he'd rather stay there and die from hunger or be killed by the Sanhedrin, and that way his heirs will get his property and not the king. That makes sense why he would hang on there, since he's going to die anyway. But if you say that his property will go to his heirs no matter what, even if the king kills him, so then what difference is there? Isn't it easier to just go to the king, get it over with, and be killed right away, rather than stay here and die of starvation hanging on to the Mizbeach? And in any case, there will be no difference. He'll be dead, and the heirs will get this property. And so the answer is L'chaya Sha'ah. You're right. That opinion can say it makes no difference for the Biuda, could say there's no difference for the property. It will go to the heirs no matter what. And the reason why he said, no, I'm going to stay here is because he wanted to live a little longer. If he lets go and goes to the king, he'll be killed immediately. And even though it will be suffering to have to stay there and starve to death, but still, he preferred to live a little bit longer. And that's why he went and held on to the altar. It didn't work anyway because they pulled him off and killed him. So it didn't help. But anyway, that's what he was thinking. We next continue with Midrash about that story of Yoav taking refuge in the sanctuary, and King Shlomo wants to kill him, and Shlomo sends Benayahu to go get him. So let's see what the conversation is there. When King Shlomo sent Benayahu with instructions to go kill Yoav, and Benayahu saw that he was clinging onto the sanctuary, so Benayahu said, get off the sanctuary, and then I'm going to kill you outside. And Yoav said, no, I'm staying right here. I will die here. And then the pasuk says that Benayahu went back and he told the king, this is what Yoav said, and this is what he answered me. So this double language over here is curious. It sounds like there was a whole conversation between them that he said, this is what he said, and then this is what he answered me, that there was some further conversation in between. So the Midrash is going to fill in the further conversation. Amar le, this is what Yoav said. He spoke pretty shrewdly to the king through Benayahu, and he said, Zil emale, tarte la ta'abid behai gabra. You cannot do two things to me, two opposite things. You got to pick a lane. I katlele kabul letute delatye abuch. If you kill him, he means me. Yoav says, if you kill me, then you will receive the curses that your father gave. When Yoav killed Avner, King David was very angry at that, and he cursed Yoav, and he said, you and your descendants are going to be cursed. We're going to read the curse in a minute. And so, if you kill me, then I will get punishment from you, and then the curse will not apply. It goes one or the other, right? If you leave me alone, then I'll get the curse. The curse will apply to me, whenever it does, now and next generations and so on. But if you kill me, then that's it. Your killing me will be my punishment, and then I won't get the curse. And the idea is that if someone gives a curse and it doesn't apply to the intended recipient, then it goes back to the person who gave the curse, which is King David. And part of the curse is that the descendants also will suffer, and that includes Shlomo and his own descendants. So if you kill me, then the curse that your father gave me will go back to you. That's choice number one. Ve'ila shabke delekubel tute delatye avuch. And if not, if you don't kill me, then I will receive the curses that your father gave me. He keep saying him because no one wants to say me. But he means really, it's in your interest, King Shlomo, to not kill me so that your father's curses will come upon me. I'll get my punishment that way, and they won't come back to you. So you should keep me alive. And the king said, do as he said, meaning option number one, and kill him. And King Shlomo, he didn't care about the curse coming back to him. But that was a big mistake. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Kol kelot shekilel David et Yoav nitkaimu bezaro shel David. Rav says that all the curses that David cursed against Yoav ended up coming true for the descendants of David himself. So not good to curse someone, because sometimes it has a boomerang effect. Ali karet mibet Yoav zav umsora mahazik bapelech v'nofel b'chere v'chasar lachem. The curse that King David gave to Yoav was, let the house of Yoav never lack such as are afflicted with, meaning there's always going to be among his descendants, zav and misora, terrible diseases, people who will have to hold on to a staff because they won't be able to walk well, those who fall by the sword, and people who lack bread. There's going to be lots of people like that among King David's descendants. So all these came true, and we're going to point out who it came true with. Zav merechabam dichtiv. Amelech Rechabam hitames la'alot b'merkaba lanus Yerushalayim. Rechabam, the son of King Shlomo, says regarding him, he came to try to overtax the north, and they were very upset, and everybody was running after him to try to stone him. And the king had to run and get to his chariot to get out of there to go to Jerusalem. So he had to run away in his chariot as fast as he could, not to get killed. Now that's nothing to do with Zav and Peshat, but the Midrash is going to make a connection between this word Merkava and what it does say about a Zav. If a Zav rides on something, then that thing becomes Tameh. So you have Merkab, and Merkab. So through a Gezerah Shava, we learned that Rechavam, not only was he almost killed in that incident, but he also was a Zav. Mesora me'uziyahu dichtiv ubechizkato gaba libo ad lehashchit vayim'al ba'Hashem Elohav vayavo elechal Hashem la'aktir al mizbeach mizbacha ketor dichtiv asarat zarecha b'mischa. Okay, the previous one was a nice, fun gezerah shava, but the next one is actually clear peshat. Uzziah became a mesora when he became strong and he was haughty, and his heart was lifted up to his destruction for his own bad. And he transgressed against Hashem. And he went to the Bet HaMikdash and he said, hey, I'm the king, I want to be a Kohen also. And he went and made a Mizbach HaKetoret, which is not allowed. As great as a king you are, you cannot be a Kohen. And immediately leprosy broke out on his forehead. So that's where we see the curse of Mesorah. Machazik Bapelech, someone holding onto a staff and not able to walk. Me'asa dichtiv rak le'ad zikna hala et raglav. Regarding Asa, all these are from the Davidic dynasty. When he was old, he had a disease of his foot, and so he couldn't walk, so he had to hold on to a staff. V'amar Yehuda amar Rav, shechazo po dag ra. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav that he got gout. Amar le mozutra bered Rav Nachman. And so Mozutra, the son of Rav Nachman, asked his father, what are the symptoms of gout? What does it feel like? And he said, Amar lekamachat b'bsarachai. It feels like a needle piercing live flesh, very painful. Minayada. Now, how did Rav Nachman know what gout feels like? Either he had it himself, Rav Nachman, so that's how he knew, for personal experience. Or maybe he learned it from his teacher. Or maybe based on the pasuk, the secret of Hashem is with those that fear Him. The idea is that the great sages, they know things about all kinds of subjects through something like divine prophecy. Like once a person is smart and they're a great sage, so they know all kinds of things, even not directly connected with Torah. Nofel b'chereb me Yoshiyahu dichtiv. Vayoru hamorim lamelech Yoshiyahu v'amar Yehuda amarav sha'asu kol gufo kakebara. Who falls by the sword? This is referring to, from the Davidic dynasty, King Yoshiyahu. As it says, the archers shot at King Yoshiyahu, and Rav elaborates that they shot so many arrows that his body was like a sieve. Okay, it's not exactly a sword, but the same idea. He's being pierced through with a sharp object. V'chasar lachem mi yechonya dichtiv aruchato aruchat tamid nitena lo. And lacking bread refers to King Yehoiachin, who was sent into exile. After many years in exile, in jail, finally he was actually freed by a future Babylonian king, and he was given a food allowance every day, a certain portion. So we see from here that only after he was freed, he got a regular portion every day. But before that, he was lacking bread. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Hainu Damare Inashe, Tehe Luta, Vela Tehe Lata. From this, Midrash Rav says, is proof for the folks saying that's better to be someone who is cursed and not someone who curses. It's not good to be either, but if someone gets cursed, okay, I don't know, maybe it will come true, maybe not. Okay, you got one was cursed, but the person who gives a curse, that is more likely that his curse will come back boomerang effect against him, and therefore be very careful not to issue curses. You never know where it's going to land. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.